right, welcome back everyone to our Todd's podcast. Our guest today is Congressman Scott Franklin, who is a Lakeland native, been dabbling in politics a little, did a little bit of local politics in 17, and then moved on to Congress in 2020. I think was it 2020?
Elected in 2020.
Elected in 2020, took office in 2021. Scott was a pilot in the United States Navy, and we're going to get into a few questions, and hopefully you'll find this interesting. But right out of the gate, what's your middle name? Because you go by Scott, and it's your middle name.
My middle name is Scott, but
your first name?
First name is Clifford.
And is that a family name?
It is a family name, though no one can really tell me how it came to be. For everyone else in the family, it was a middle name. For some reason, they decided to make it my first one, which has really caused a lot of confusion all my life. The good thing is it helps me screen out telemarketers. If anybody calls a house looking for Clifford, actually nobody calls a house anymore because we don't have landlines.
Well, my middle name is Todd.
Okay.
I'm Raymond Todd. So, it's kind of a cruel trick that I tell people my parents played on me because, there's usually a spot for a middle initial, but not a middle name.
Right.
And Raymond is my first name, and I was named after my grandfather and my uncle. And Todd is a random name, I think. And but I've always been that, and my uncle was my Uncle Ray. But, there's a few of us like that go by our middle name. And I was wondering what your middle name was. My dad, who was in the military, he was in the Army, he did not have a middle name. And so he always was referred to as Richard NMI Dantzler, no middle initial.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was kind of funny.
Well, Harry Truman didn't have a middle name either. The S he made up. It was just,
Really?
It was Harry Truman, and they finally said, no, man, you got to have a middle name. He's like, all right, it's S.
And he just made it up.
Yeah, that's what I'm told.
So you were born in Georgia, grew up in Lakeland. When did you move here?
Moved when I was 13.
Okay.
So all of our family, prior to us coming to Florida, had been in Georgia for a couple of hundred years, North Carolina before that, Virginia, Boston.
Right.
So we've kind of moved down the coast. And I went to high school here in Lakeland, but that's...
Lakeland High School?
Yeah, Lakeland High.
Did you play any sports in high school?
By high school, I was just doing track. I'd grown up playing a little bit of everything and played football in Georgia, golf, track, all those things. I got to Lakeland and... the size of the line was a little different at Lakeland High School than what I was accustomed to before. So I was always a runner and a jumper.
Yes, I was always a scrawny kid. Not so much anymore, but I was, I started my senior year at 5'6" and graduated at 5'11", but I still weighed, about 130 pounds. And then I got to Gainesville and discovered eating and drinking without parental supervision. So, and my mom's family is from Georgia. She was born in Adel and raised in Moultrie in the South part. And my dad, his father was a tobacco farmer in South Carolina, and they got hit with the boll weevil infestation. So he moved down to Winter Haven to be a farmer. And so, yes, it's interesting how we all come down here in one way or another. In high school, were you interested in student government, or what were your extracurricular activities other than track?
Yeah, I was. I never really thought about it, politically so much, but just got involved. I was... starting in 10th grade, I was class vice president. 11th grade, I was class president. Didn't have office as a senior, but I was involved in student government along the way and club officers and things like that.
And what year did you graduate?
82 from Lakeland.
82? Mm-hmm. I was 77. My younger brother was 80, so we got you by a couple of years. How did you went to the Naval Academy?
Yeah.
Is the Navy in your family? How did you get involved? Did you say, hey, I want to fly, and I want to fly Navy jets, so here's my...
So a little bit of all that. Yeah, I would say no direct ancestors were Navy so much, but everyone in our family has served. It's not like it was one of those things drilled into you. It's just kind of one of those examples that I follow. But everyone in my family, going back to really the early 1700s, has served in the military. I had a eighth great grandfather that was with George Washington, Lieutenant Colonel Washington, in the French and Indian War, and we've been involved in everything since then. As a little kid, I was interested in flying. My first really memory that kind of drove me to what I ultimately did was living in Houston in 1969. I was 5 years old, and the astronauts had just come back from landing on the moon. There was a ticker tape parade, and all these guys are riding down the street, and these sitting up on the backs of convertibles. But the Blue Angels came over flying F-4 Phantoms, and that's what really got my attention and something I always wanted to pursue.
So you went to the Naval Academy. what was your major? What did you study? What did you do in the Naval Academy in Annapolis?
Yeah, so I was an oceanography major there,
Okay.
which is a little different, being a landlocked Floridian, not a whole lot of that here, but just something that always interested me. Everybody at Navy graduates with a Bachelor of Science, whether you're a history major or in astrophysics, it doesn't matter. Everybody gets a BS. So I was involved in that academically, sports-wise. Everybody's required to play sports too. I was on the sailing team initially as a plebe, and I'd kind of broken the code that when you're a plebe, you can't leave the academy, but if you're on the sailing team, you can go away on weekends. So it was a way to escape. And as soon as I got freedom after plebe year was over, I started playing rugby, which was a sport I'd never been exposed to till I got to Navy.
So going in the Navy, how did you then gravitate into being an aviator as opposed to, a non-aviator in the Navy?
Well, I knew that's what I wanted to do going in. And in fact, in high school, I was looking at the service academies, and I'd gotten really good advice by someone who said, listen, the paperwork's all pretty similar. If you really want to serve your country, all the services are good. So give your first shot, but have a backup. And I've always been one about having plenty of options available. So I applied to all the academies, and ended up being a blessing of riches. I got appointed to Navy, West Point, and Air Force, so I got to choose. And it really was solidified when I went up and visited a friend of mine who had graduated from Lakeland a year ahead of me, who was a plebe at the Naval Academy at that time. And I just had come to the conclusion I knew I wanted to fly, but if something happened and I was physically unable to, if my eyes went bad, I felt the Navy offered better options. You could fly, you could go Marine Corps, because the Marines are part of the Department of the Navy. You could go submarines, you can go ships, you could go SEALs. So to me, the Naval Academy offered everything that all the other academies offered. So it was just more options. And again, that's kind of been a little bit of a mantra in my life, is always have options.
And did you meet your wife when you were in college, or once you were in the Navy, or how did you meet Amy?
No, she likes to tell everybody she's much younger. We met on a blind date. I was already out of the academy, had just finished flight school, and was home in Lakeland on leave, Christmas leave.
So she's a Lakeland girl?
No, she's from Brandon, but her sorority sister was from Lakeland. And we got set up on a blind date. That was, I guess, over Christmas of '88. And her sorority sister told us, I've got the perfect guy for you. I promise you're going to marry this guy. And so Amy tells her friend, says, if I marry this guy, you can be my maid of honor. I always thought for probably 20 years that she was serious about that. She was really being facetious, because she thought there's no way in hell that I'm gonna marry some Navy guy off a blind date.
Well, it's obviously worked out for you. You've been married, what, 37?
33 in November.
33 in November?
Yeah. She was still young. She graduated from Florida, let's say class of 90 for her. So she was 4 years in school behind me, and we got married pretty soon after she graduated.
Good. So your naval career, what did you fly?
Mostly torpedo bombers. I was always based on aircraft carriers. So S-3 Vikings was my primary platform. Got about 3,500 hours in those. And along the way, to go through the training, I flew T-34 Mentors, which was a turboprop, T-2 Buckeyes, which was the first jet, and then A-4 Skyhawks. And then along the way, I was able to cross-train in F-14, so I flew Tomcats some. And other time in planes like P-3 Orions and things like that, but mostly torpedo bombers, always carrier based.
So in doing a little research, it said that you had flown or been stationed, or station is the wrong word, but you'd flown off 11 different aircraft carriers.
13, actually.
13?
Yeah, well.
What's the first rush like when you first do your first catapult launch off of an aircraft carrier?
It is the most exhilarating thing I have ever done up to that point and since then. There's really nothing else that compares to that. So it's.
And did you have a full crew with you when you did your first, or did they say, "Hey, let's just try them off"? And
no, you're solo. First time you go to the ships by yourself. I mean, they take you out there on the wing of a flight lead, but then you peel off, and you go out there flying formation off of someone's wing, and then they tell you you're overhead the ship, and you're trying to steal a little peek down to look at it. And the first time I saw, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe how small that is. I'd heard all the analogies of, it looks like a postage stamp from up above, and it really does. It's tiny. And you think, I don't know how the heck that's going to happen.
So how many launches did you do, or do you keep track of those?
We do. I don't have my logbook, and I've been trying to find that. It's right around 800, a little over 800 carrier landings.
Never got old.
Well,
Well, it never could get old, really, because you always
So-
had to be on top of your game.
yeah, I tell you, daytime carrier takeoff and landings are the most fun I've ever had. Nighttime is just one of those things. You have to do it. You bite the bullet, and anybody that tells you they like flying at night off the carrier is lying to you. It's really just a matter of managing a little bit of fear and chaos, and it's something that you either want to do fairly frequently, not because you like it, because you need to do it for currency and comfort level, or you don't want to do it at all. And the way the Navy runs it is you have to have a carrier landing at night once every 7 days, or else you go out of currency, and then you have to get a day touch and go in a trap before you can go at night, and that gets hard to manage. So they don't want to allow people to get outside of 7 days. So you got to go once a week, and if you're going to go once a week, you'd rather get in a rhythm. And I'd like to get on the night page, is what we call it.
Right.
I'd fly every night, and plus it just helps keeping your body clock adjusted to stay on the same rhythm.
So how many of the S3s were typically on a carrier? I'm sure it depended on the mission, but I mean, was there typically 10 of them or?
Yeah, early deployments we had 10. Later it moved to 8. It really depended on what was going on, and as other airframes were cycling in and out of the air wing, because the S3 was a multi-mission airplane. It was originally designed to hunt submarines.
Right.
And after the Cold War, that changed. It started picking up a lot of other missions, different radars, and was sort of an armed reconnaissance, kind of a jack of all trades. It do a little bit of everything.
And you had 3 other crew members
Yeah,
with you.
you always had one. You didn't have to have people in the back, so it was a side-by-side, a pilot and a co-pilot who wasn't the person in the right seat was not a pilot. They were a
Right.
navigator, and then you might have 2 in the back. So it was either a 2 or 4.
Was that crew typically the same, or your co-pilot was always the same? That
No, it's
just whoever got the assignment that day?
yeah.
And how many pilots like you would have been on a typical mission? I mean, they can't just have 10 of y'all. They've got to keep these airplanes going on a fairly regular basis, and you have to have rest. And
Well, on any particular cycle, and on the carrier, they'd break up the day in cycles, and we have 10 to 12 cycles, which would be just rounds of flights. There might be a couple of S3s on a particular cycle, but then you'd also have F-14s, F-18s, depending on when this
Right.
was, A6s, A7s, helicopters, Prowlers, E-2 Hawkeyes with the dome. So a little bit of everything goes up on every cycle.
did you typically try and get the same plane that you were used to? So you
I
just
mean, you
got
have
whatever
one.
one they.
Yeah, once you get senior enough, you have one with your name painted on it. But
Right.
it's not your plane.
Right.
Yeah.
But I didn't
We
know
cycled.
if you knew the idiosyncrasies of each plane.
Oh, you
and
get to
say,
know
hey,
them
this
all.
one I got to feather harder or push harder or lighter.
Yeah, there was always, every squadron had the Christine, the plane that just had demons. That,
Right.
You would fly it, but you're always being a little careful, knowing that something could happen there.
What was life like on an aircraft carrier? What was a typical deployment for y'all? 6 months? 3
Anywhere from
months?
6 to 8 months. Yeah, they've gotten longer now, but notionally it was 6 months. And so when you're on sea duty, which is a 3-year tour, you'd probably expect to do a couple of 6-month deployments during that tour, and then. But in a regular cycle, you deploy for 6 months, then you come home for 2 or 3 months, and kind of a wind down, and people be rotating out. But then you go right into training for the next cycle. So in the year leading up to a 6-month deployment, you're gone about 8 or 9 months of that time. So when Amy and I hit our 10th anniversary, we did the math and looked at the calendar and realized we'd only been together about 5 years.
Wow.
Gone a lot. It's a lot of separation.
And I don't think people understand the stress that puts on a family. I did not come from a military family. My dad did 2 years in the Army, and my brothers and I never served. But people don't understand the stress that either a military family goes under or the family of a political person. Is the elected official can fight back, but the family members typically have to take it.
They
And I
get
know
pulled along for the ride.
yeah, and I know when my older brother was running for state senate, there was one of his opponents started going after him a little bit, and you know who he is. I'll tell you after the podcast is over. And luckily, my mom and dad were in England at the time. I said, I'm so glad Mom's not having to listen to this because she would just be incensed. And, Rick had the ability to battle back and fight back and respond. But as a family member, you kind of sit there and take it.
Well, my wife would tell you that her time as a Navy spouse was the most invaluable time she spent. She didn't really ask for it. I guess indirectly she did.
Right.
She did, but she didn't really know what she was getting into.
Right.
But it made her a very independent woman. And she
Good.
said, she was not that way before. So yeah, all these years later, the political world is a lot like that, like being a military spouse. And it's not cliche. Finally, we're recognizing the role that military families and spouses in particular play. But folks out there doing their thing in the military absolutely couldn't do it without support from back home.
I agree wholeheartedly with
And
that.
it's the same in politics too. Yeah.
It is. I know that when I ran, I told my kids, they were 16 and 14 at the time, or 17 and 15, I forgot what. And I said, hey, I've never done this before. Uncle Rick's done it. I don't know what people may or may not say. I said, if anyone says something, just ask me and I'm happy to tell you the truth. Yeah. Don't listen to, people outside. Just ask me and I'll tell you. And luckily, it never got ugly. Local politics is a little different than the federal level. I mean, you guys play hardball in the majors and, it's different. And you have spent a couple of years local politics, and now you've got a couple of years under your belt at national. What's the difference?
Oh, lots of differences. Well, just one thing on the kids, we're fortunate. All three of our kids are up and grown, so they're their own adults. They have their own opinions. None of them even lives in Florida.
Right.
So I've very purposefully left them out of everything that we've done. I'm not one that tries to drag the family into it and do all the little, the canned pictures and that kind of thing. They live their own lives, and interestingly, we've got all kinds of political perspectives, and we finally agree to disagree sometimes at Thanksgiving. But
life is easier if you don't bring up politics.
Yeah, well, there's a reason they say that.
Yeah.
But I'd say the biggest difference is I love local politics. And I would tell anyone who has any motivation, any interest whatsoever to try getting involved on a local board, and all the municipalities need them. But the great thing is you can take decisive action and quickly see results. And they may not be good results. I mean, they're good or bad, but you can course correct, tweak, and go down the road. It's just so frustrating at the federal level how slowly things work.
I was a county commissioner for 8 years, and there was only 5 of us. You were city commissioner for a few years, and there were 7 of y'all. Yeah. If you only need to get 2 other people to agree with you, you're not banging your head against the wall so much. You may lose, and I was very comfortable losing decisions 4-1. I really liked only having to get 2 people to kind of go along with me on different things. You had the same thing, but you just alluded to, now you've got all these people in Congress that are from all over the world. I just think ever getting to a decision is almost an act of God, it seems like.
It's hard, and another thing that really differentiates Florida and local government and all politics here from the federal level is our sunshine laws in Florida. Right. They can be frustrating at times at the local level. Some of us fellow commissioners would commiserate that we often felt like we were the least informed in the room because everyone else could talk together and conspire and come up with a strategy, and we couldn't do any of that. So we had to trust that what we were being fed by staff and others was the full scoop, but there are no backroom deals at all. That's not the case in Tallahassee. It's not the case in Washington. And so
they all promulgate the rules from the top down, and at the local level, you just have to deal with whatever they give you.
Yeah.
And what I've seen in Florida at the state level is there's super majorities, so they don't even have to really talk to the other side.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys in Congress right now, you got a 4-member majority, good or bad. I mean, but you do have to try and build coalitions for the most part.
Yeah.
Todd's podcast is sponsored in part by SVN Saunders Ralston Dantzler Real Estate. Since 1996, the firm has offered unrivaled brokerage services throughout Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. With over 90 expert advisors throughout the region, our team has the knowledge and resources to help clients realize their most ambitious real estate investment goals. When you choose SVN Saunders Ralston Dantzler Real Estate, you have access to a diverse suite of commercial and land services, including forestry consulting, land management, auctions, property management, commercial leasing, and negotiating conservation easements. If you're seeking to invest in land or explore commercial real estate opportunities in the Southeast, contact us today at svnsaunders.com or call 877-518-5263 to connect with an advisor today. Once again, that's svnsaunders.com or by phone at 877 518 5263.
Your Navy buddies. I just got one or two other questions on that. Do you ever hang out with them? Do you ever see them?
Sure. Yeah.
Any of them local, or do y'all get together? Hey, we're all going to fly to Omaha or wherever and just hang out? Or
A little of all that. I have friends who are in the D.C. area. A lot of folks
Right.
have taken jobs up in that area, but I still stay in touch with a lot of my Naval Academy buddies. Several of us had made a commitment to go take a sailing trip down to the islands back when we were 18. We said we'd do it in 30 years, which, 30 years when you're 18 sounds like, might as well be 1,000 years. So we didn't make it at that point. We're about 10 years later than that. But three of us got together with our spouses down in the islands on a sailing trip this past year, which was great.
so you did a great number of years active duty, then you went into the reserves. So when you came back, did you immediately go to work for Lanier Upshaw? Is that a family business? Is that
No, it wasn't a
you were
family
just
business.
brought in, or how does that work for you?
So my dad had done that in Georgia, and that's how we ended up in Florida.
Okay.
He owned an agency up in the small town where we've been there, and it was just a small town, and things were not. It wasn't a growing town. There wasn't a lot of opportunity, and he had gotten to know a gentleman who's since passed away, Chuck Beauvais, who was the president of Lanier Upshaw at the time, and I kind of likened it to the Clampetts and the Beverly Hillbilly story. And Chuck was like, listen, Jim, Florida's a land of opportunity. You need to come on down. So we loaded up the truck and moved down in 1978. And that's just what my dad did. I honestly never had any interest in it. I always wanted to fly. And all I knew when I left to go to college is that the company had a no nepotism rule. There were no family members that were allowed. They had agreed to do that. And which is fine with me. It wasn't anything that I wanted to do. But along the way, the Navy requires you to get a graduate degree. So I'd done my MBA, more of just to check the block with the Navy, but just to see what I might be interested in later on. And friends or some of my dad's partners had gotten together and knew that I was pursuing a business degree, knew that I was thinking about maybe things outside of the Navy, and had gone to my dad and said, hey, listen, we've always had this rule, but we'd be willing to waive that if Scott would be interested. So my dad would have never approached me in a million years about suggesting that I leave the Navy and come back here. I think, he enjoyed living vicariously through what I was doing, and
Right.
never wanted to be, responsible if something didn't work out, that he had maybe tempted me to leave. But, I've told folks it was flying, being a naval aviator was the coolest thing in the world at 22.
Right.
And, I got my degree from Navy the week that Top Gun came out. I'd been in Miramar the summer before while they were filming the movie. I had orders to Pensacola. Life was great, and it was fun. It was fun while we were single, and while we were married with no kids. And Amy would fly over. She had a couple of times where she could fly over and visit when we were pulling to port. Once we had kids, that all changed. So when I left, it was gone, and I was missing watching kids growing up. So I tell folks, it went from the best job in the world at 22 and not so much fun by the time I was 35, and had 3 kids under 5 and was gone, 8 months a year. So I thought I'd have the opportunity to kind of have my cake and eat it too by going out and pursuing business, but then staying in the reserves. And, prior to 9/11, the reserves were a pretty sweet gig.
Right.
To do a weekend a month and 2 weeks a year, continue to get promoted and do the things that you like to do. After 9/11, that all changed. And I found that out very quickly. I left active duty in 2000, joined a reserve unit over at Central Command, and then promptly on 9/11 got called up. So I called up twice. I was over in Bahrain for a couple of months right after 9/11, and then got home for a few weeks for about a month, and then got called up again for another year, and just finally decided there's a reason I left active duty.
Right.
And so I decided to go into the individual reserves after that. So that kind of meant promotion was off the table, but at least I wasn't going to be deploying, at the drop of a hat over and over again.
So you were a pilot your whole career. Do you still like to fly? Do you miss flying the jets? Do you have a private plane that you fly, or, how do you get your fix on of getting up in the
Well,
air?
I don't get, right now it's flying American Airlines back and forth every week from either Tampa or Orlando to DC. I do miss flying, but you can't do that kind of flying anymore. I had a plane. I was a partner with another guy here in Lakeland in a plane that I used for business for a number of years, and really enjoyed that and got a chance to do a little bit of fun traveling. It's just not the same, not zipping around at treetop level at 400 knots or dropping bombs or, making a lot of noise. You can't do that anymore. So I've kind of moved on beyond it.
What other jobs did you have growing up? Because you don't seem like a kid who would have ever been allowed just to sit around, just like we weren't. We either had to play sports or have a job. That was, some of it was in the backyard. We had all boys in our neighborhood, so we always had teams. But if you're not playing a sport in school, then you're working.
Absolutely.
Even if it's menial work. What did you do in high school?
Well, that work ethic is something that, I know my dad got it from his grandfather. That's been passed down. That was an absolute. I remember as a little kid, even when there were things that I wasn't big enough to be able to do, my dad would require me to go outside and watch him do it. He's like, I don't care. You may not be able to do it, but you're going to learn how to do it by watching until you can. So there were no Saturday cartoons or anything like that. I was always out doing the work. So when I got old enough to work, even before I was legally able, I was cutting grass around the neighborhood and putting the lawnmower in the back of my mom, putting the station wagon, take me to where I needed to go and cut and it was $5 to cut grass, and that was big money.
And hopefully your parents paid for the gas to put in the lawnmower, so
that wasn't
you
lost.
You kind of had a profit thing there.
Yeah, they've reminded me over time that they furnish the equipment and all the materials for that. But I think as much as anything else, they knew it was keeping me out of trouble doing it. But then I started, my first official business was the Grove Park Lawn Service, right here behind your office. I lived on Clarendon Avenue, a couple streets behind Grove Park here, and another guy, Mike Meeks, and I, who lived on Meadowbrook, we had the Grove Park Lawn Service, and we cut grass all over the neighborhood for, making whatever we could. And then later on, I got to working at Williams & Williams sports clothing store, which used to be across from the Lakeland Library.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
that building was the Lakeland Library?
No, where the Lakeland, where the library is on Lake Morton, kind of across the street. Actually, it's across the street from the museum, the art museum, Polk Museum of Art parking lot. That's where they were for a number of years. Yeah. So I would, and before I was 16 and had a car, I would finish at Lakeland High School and walk to work, and then, work all afternoon. If sports weren't in season, then my dad would pick me up after work. So,
well, I was the middle of three boys, and so we all had yard work and chores to do. And we had I think we were on a half-acre lot, but it had a pretty high slope. And we never had a self-propelled lawnmower. We had a push lawnmower with a 19 or 21-inch deck, whatever it was. And I was so small and short, I couldn't just push the top bar. I had to get one hand on the middle bar and one on the top. And if I knew how to cuss back then, I'm pretty sure I would have learned every word. And when we got a riding lawnmower, it was like I had just won the Indianapolis 500. I loved mowing at that point.
Oh, so you lived a life of privilege.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we always had a push mower, a snapper, and it was not self-propelled or anything. Yep. And when we
ours
first
was a lawn boy.
Well, we had this thing. It was heavy. I mean, those snappers. They're durable, but they're heavy.
Yes.
And we initially had Bahia grass, and my dad pulled that out and put in St. Augustine, which is really thick. And to push a heavy mower, not self-propelled, we had this bank down behind the house. I really found it ironic that the moment I went off to the Naval Academy, he cashed that thing in for a riding snapper.
And we never had a gas-powered edger. We had that little half moon. Thing that you just had to hop on and just go all the way down, then get another hoe and pull it out. And it's like, why doesn't someone make a tool? And amazing, they did make those tools once we went off to school.
Yep.
So now shifting gears a little bit to your time in Congress. There's more personalities and you can shake a stick up there. How do you deal, because you seem like a very humble person. I know you to be a very humble person. How do you deal with the publicity seekers and the just total narcissists that are in Congress? And, some of them just come across as jokers. Are they even serious? They seem like they're auditioning for a gig on, one of the networks or trying to get on a magazine cover. It's almost like there's no statesmanship. I'm sure there is, but what you see on TV is just a bunch of head knocking, and
it's frustrating. I'll tell you, it's exhausting at times because a lot of times the folks that are getting the most attention are those. And but I would tell you, there are a lot of very thoughtful, really smart, disciplined folks that are up there trying to do the right thing. But there are definitely some who are there for the show and trying to build a brand beyond life in Congress. And there's some of those on both sides of the aisle.
Oh, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
I will, no names or anything like that, but yeah, there are a lot of people trying to get work done. But the problem, there's a lot of problems, but a challenge we have now in this age of social media, network or cable channels and all that is there's just so many people trying to get attention, and an outrage sells, and that's where people can get attention and get a following by just prodding their own echo chamber and trying to keep them stoked and outraged. But I wish people, the public, would remember that every one of those things they're tuning into is doing it for the money at the end of the day, and so they're trying to find an audience that's looking to hear a particular message and then trying to keep them enraged so that they keep their attention.
But I've always felt like if you can send a better quality person to make decisions, you get better decisions. And we all know who the people we're talking about are, but they keep getting reelected from their hometown. And I remember Adam Putnam was a guest at one of our company barbecues, and he said, guys, there's nothing you can do about Nancy Pelosi. Don't even let her get under your skin, because you can't vote for her. All you can vote for is the people that you live, in their district. And that made a lot of sense. Is don't get overwhelmed by the shenanigans if there's enough good people up there like you and the people that you deal with that are really trying to make a difference and trying to pass, proper legislation.
That's true. And a lot of folks are not wanting, but demanding that we opine and take a stance on every national issue, even if there are a lot of things that aren't within our purview or within our control. Even if I can't do anything about it, they still want to know. And everything is a binary decision. Well, not everything, but for a lot of people, it just becomes binary. You're either for this or you're against it. And I can be with somebody 99% of the time. Used to be, Ronald Reagan used to say, if you find some, a person who agrees with you 80% of the time is your friend, not your enemy. Now, 95% of the time isn't good enough. Someone's going to pick that 5% of the time that you disagree, and they could care less about anything else you have to say or do.
And you hear that when you come home. It's not just in the halls of Congress.
Oh, it's absolutely when you come home.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, is this the only thing you're judging me by, is this one decision? And it's often like, do you have all the facts that I had? Do you have the benefit of the expert testimony, the staff research? I'm happy to give you more facts if you want to know why I made my decision.
And there's a fine line. I certainly don't ever want to sound condescending, like I know more. But I mean, the reality is when we're in that all day long, and you do see there's nuance to everything, and people don't see that. And as long as people are open to listening, and I love to listen. I love to get differing opinions and hear why people think differently. But if folks are locked in and not willing to listen, then there's no room to move forward together.
Do you ever see this as a career for you?
No.
Good. And I say that.
I don't think it ought to be anybody's career.
I agree. I think your citizen legislatures, you go up, serve your time, whether it's 2, 4, 8, 10, whatever the time is.
Yeah.
And I was never a big fan of term limits until I was term limited out. And thank goodness, or I'd have probably felt obligated to do one more term. And 8 years was enough.
Yeah.
And smart people, good people come behind you. And, they may not agree with what I agree with. They may not make the same decisions I made. But it's their turn to run it. It's not my turn to be there forever. And, you've got folks in Congress and the Senate that have been there forever. And I think part of it is they didn't have anything behind them when they went up. This is their identity. You've got options when you come back. When I got out, I never had to go anywhere. I just had one at Bartow, but I was always an operating realtor, and I loved that. And I knew I was a realtor when I went in. I'm a realtor when I come out. But a lot of people don't know what to do once they get out. Well,
yeah, it's interesting. That reminds me of something that your partner, Dean Saunders, had told me that was some wisdom that Lawton Childs had passed down to him, that said the worst thing, he felt that the worst thing that could ever happen to someone was to go into politics young.
Right.
Because there are a lot of temptations in there. You get, even if someone goes in humble, you've really got to guard yourself, because you got people, blowing sunshine at you all the time that are trying to, curry favor with you. And it's easy to lose your perspective. So, for me, I don't know how long I'll do this. As long as I feel like I can be effective, I probably will. But this kind of came along at a time in our lives when I'd sold our business.
Right.
All three of our kids are out of college and off and doing their own thing, and we don't have any grandkids yet. So my wife has told me that once grandkids come along, I'm definitely going to be a solo act. So it's kind of a sweet spot in our lives right now to be able to do it. But I don't think anyone ought to do it for a career. And I have a love-hate relationship with the term limit concept. I get it. I believe it.
Right.
When I look at across the dais and see a lot of ranking committee members that are in their 80s, no offense, my parents are there, but it's just there's a time when people need to turn it over and let someone else run with the baton. But one of the things we do have, and it's a little bit of a difference, and this is one of those things a lot of folks don't understand. On the Republican side of the aisle in Washington, we have strict limits on how long you can chair a committee, and it's 6 years. And after that, you've got to give up the chairmanship, or if you're the ranking member. And so for a lot of people, once they've had that leadership role, they don't want to go back to being rank and file. So we have a good, healthy turnover. We have, in our Republican conference now, 222 members, I guess, 60% of us have gotten there since 2016.
Wow.
So a lot of people don't understand. Well, you see the old, quote, old folks up there, and we certainly have those. I've talked to folks on the other side of the aisle. The young Democrats are really frustrated because everything with their committees is pure seniority.
Right.
And if you look when Pelosi was Speaker and the Democrats had all the committee chairs, almost every one of them was over 80 years old. And that's frustrating if you're a 35 or 40-year-old young Democrat coming to Washington knowing, like, I've got to be here for 40 years before I could ever chair a committee. Right. And it's just wrong. But I think D.C. is very complex. There's term limits folks want 6 years. I'll tell you, now that I've been there for a year and a half, that's not long enough. It is so complicated a process. I can't imagine how you would do that. I also see that, and you can kind of sense it from Tallahassee as well with the 8-year term limits there. The lobbyists and the staffers have a tremendous amount of control. And if people are worried about any kind of deep state, it would be like, you start flushing all the elected representation out of there every 6 or 8 years. The only people who are going to have control in D.C. are going to be the lobbyists and the staffers, the lifelong career bureaucrats.
But in Tallahassee, it's a part-time gig, supposedly. I mean, they end up doing 5 months.
Ask the reps. Most of them will tell you that's not the case.
But it's 60 days in, and then you're supposed to come home, and then you go back for committees.
Yeah.
We all have friends that do it. And it seems like total, they've got 4 or 5 months tied up in it. So it makes it hard. Right. You have to have that job that will allow that. But you are reliant on staff. Yeah. Because you're not a full-time legislator, and you've got to make a living. And you've got to have the people that you trust around you. And
well, we do too. Even though ours is full time,
right?
The breadth of what you're having to kind of say grace over is it's mind-boggling. Right. And every year we'll have folks calling, emailing, writing us every day about particular bills. There are thousands of bills that are introduced, and what a lot of people don't know too is every 2 years at the end of a Congress, everything is gone.
Right.
If it doesn't finish by the end of that Congress, it's over. So even a bill that you've been trying to get for years, everything has to be reintroduced. It's all on a 2-year cycle, and there's just so much to try to keep your head up. Most of my peers would agree that you feel like you're about 1/8 of an inch thick and 20,000 miles wide because you just got so many things to try to be on top of.
Hello, this is your Polk State College President, Dr. Angela Garcia Falconetti. Call me Angela. Hola, es su presidenta de Polk State College, nuestra universidad en el condado de Polk. And I want to thank you for listening to Todd's podcast. Todd's a great friend. He's a wonderful leader in our community, and he's a great business professional. Don't forget to subscribe to Todd's podcast, as each interview offers incredible insights. Mine may have some, I don't know if they're incredible, but into these great guests. You will not be disappointed.
Who's your best friend in Congress? Or one of them. You don't have to give me the absolute best because I don't want you to.
Well, I would actually have a lot of good friends. I kind of think back to this old definition of, there's friends for a reason, friends
Right.
for a season, and friends for life. I've kind of I'm moving into the friends for a season phase. My first term, we were still under a lot of COVID lockdowns.
Right.
We didn't get a chance to do a whole lot of things together. So this time has been different. We're finally starting to be able to do trips and travel together. I was just in Europe last week, inspecting a lot of defense installations, and those are great. When you travel with people, you get a chance to let the guard down and figure out what they're really like. There's also a requirement on those CODELs, they call them congressional delegations, that they be bipartisan. That's a requirement to get them approved, and that has been a very good way for me to meet people across the aisle. And when you travel with folks and you socialize, the guard comes down and you figure out, like, after a cocktail, you can say, "No, help me understand.
Right.
How do you get from here to there on this issue?"
Right.
And we have a lot of those kinds of conversations that we would never have in DC. Well, not never have in DC, but they're much harder to do.
But that's how it should be, is you should be able to sit down with anyone and say, tell me why you think the way you do and what's
Right.
your reasoning, and then let me tell you mine.
Yeah.
And try and persuade them. It just seems like, and again, my perspective is the news, and I stopped watching most of it, but it just seems like everyone's yelling at you, telling you what you're supposed to believe, rather than trying to persuade you.
Yeah. Well,
Make the argument. Tell me why I should believe what you believe.
I've always believed I was into team sports. I believe in team activities, and I just think that a group of smart people coming together with different perspectives and experiences and backgrounds are going to formulate better decisions. That's why on the city commission here in Lakeland, I really enjoyed that. I was not a proponent of the strong mayor system because I felt that would concentrate too much power in one person's hand.
Right.
That's great if you happen to like that person's ideas, but if you don't, I mean, there's a difference between a dictator and a benevolent dictator. And I felt that a group is going to be it's messier, it's going to be more tedious, but at the end of the day, I think it's going to more often than not yield a better decision, and certainly something that has greater buy-in than just everything's my way or the highway.
And the county was like that too. As there was a debate, hey, do we have a strong chairman?
Right.
And we've decided not to, and I think that's correct, because the chairman, all you do is run the meeting, and you get a little bit more say over the agenda for the meeting you're getting ready to go into, but you still have 20% of the vote. And at the city, you were one of 7.
Right.
And your job is to persuade and to argue and try and get people to do it. And I found that local politics wasn't quite as ideological as it seems like it is in Tallahassee and DC.
Oh, for sure.
Here we were trying to fix roads, trying to fund the sheriff, trying to flush toilets, trying to build, little league parks. And it wasn't like you guys have to deal
It's less,
with.
definitely less partisan.
Right.
And, more, what I didn't really appreciate enough going into the city commission was how much, zoning and property rights and all that were a big piece of things. That's a lot of what you end up doing, and funding infrastructure, which is why I do have some angst seeing partisanship being driven down into all these local races now, because at the end of the day, a lot of times those aren't the decisions that are being made.
Right.
If someone's trying to decide whether to put a new development on the street next to them, that's not a Republican or Democrat thing. It's a matter
It's a compatibility thing.
yeah. And yeah, I understand there's philosophies on pro-growth or anti-growth and that kind of thing, but now we're seeing people who want to run for city commission. They want to know who you're endorsing in the presidential race.
Right.
It has nothing to do with that. And that's not going to change. Back to Adam's thing.
Right.
It's about Nancy Pelosi.
Well, I'm a commercial real estate broker, and I felt that you mentioned land use and zoning are some of the biggest decisions you make. And that's what I felt like some of the biggest impactful decisions I made, other than funding different, county operational, is knowing what's compatible and knowing how to understand, can you put this next to that? How do you transition from a commercial to a single family? Do you do a lighter commercial? Do you do office? Do you do multifamily? And so I agree with you. It's a lot less ideological, and it's a lot more pragmatic. And I enjoyed that part of it. I was not a big fan of all the ceremonial stuff, going and giving speeches and ribbon cuttings. I did it because that's part of the job, but I really enjoyed trying to make the decisions and figure some of that stuff out.
Well, and that's where I hope people, as they're evaluating candidates, would look at someone's thoughtfulness, and are they looking at the big picture? Because it should never be growth at any cost or no growth at any
Right.
cost. The reality is, and we're blessed here in Central Florida, I guess some might consider it a curse, but the growth is coming. There are a lot of places in the country that would kill for the growth that we have because they can't do anything to attract jobs and businesses. Right. We've got that. It's just how do we manage it in a way that we can still capture the things we love about our community and try to hold on to that, knowing that the growth is inevitable. And you can see examples of communities that have done it well and not so well.
Do you think the men and women in Congress that are military comport themselves a little different than some of the others?
I probably have some blinders on there, but I'd say, yeah.
I mean, I think you do too, because they have a different background and a different discipline.
Well, so there's a lot of different, I think, aspects to that. And one of those is that we have all served on a mission that was bigger than ourselves, that was apolitical. You had to get the thing done, and you couldn't do it up by yourself. You had to rely on working with others. And I tell folks the day that I shaved my head and raised my hand and swore the oath to the Constitution as a plebe at the Naval Academy, we in my squad we had blacks, whites, Hispanics, Asians,
and you didn't care.
Wealthy, poor, East Coast, West Coast, New York. I mean, it didn't matter. We all had, it was a cooperate to graduate, and we got the job done. And so that's driven into you. And so that's a piece of it. I also think that the exposure we get to the broader world, I tell people, I love that we treat our veterans better now than we did in the Vietnam era. But I got far more out of serving in the military than I ever gave, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. And I wish everyone had the opportunity to do that. I've traveled to 70 or more countries. I've had a chance to experience other cultures. I call my deployments my U.S. appreciation tours because it's nice to go visit other places. Every time I'm on a plane coming home, I'm thankful to come back here. And I think a lot of people don't really understand that. I mean, we have the luxury of being separated by a couple of oceans, even though it's not the 3-mile-an-hour world that we were in 100 years ago. We've had the luxury to be insulated from a lot of that. And in this day and age, that's an illusion. I think there are a lot of people that feel that we should just do what we've done before and retrench, and we can operate without the rest of the world. That's not really the case anymore. It hasn't been for a long time.
For the people that complain about our country, who want to complain, my answer
show me a better country.
I say go somewhere else.
Exactly.
I say go to the best other country.
Right.
The best.
Yeah.
And people are dying to get to this country for a reason.
There's not a problem with people trying to flee the U.S. to get across the border to Canada or Mexico.
Correct. And
I'm still waiting for a few from Hollywood to do
and
that.
So, we are so truly blessed to be here and have the freedom to sit and talk and complain and, do what we do. And it was thanks to men and women like yourself and that have done so much over the years. Turn a little bit to geopolitics. I don't want to get into too much. Who's the bigger threat right now, Russia or China?
Ooh. They're both significant threats. China, hands down, is the greatest threat to the free world, really.
Right.
Russia's threat is more localized, but we have such tremendous interdependencies with Europe as far as a trade partner. Russia, I don't see Russia in an effort to dominate the world. China absolutely does. I mean, that's part of their doctrine.
Economically and militarily,
everything.
Everything,
hands down.
Whatever, when they wake
the board,
up, that's their job.
They want to be the world superpower. They're not looking to share it with us. They're not looking to be subservient to the U.S. and that's a real threat. But if you look at demographics, long term, they're going to have a hard time sustaining their population, but it doesn't mean between now and then they won't eat our lunch. And they have been militarily, economically, in a lot of different ways. And I think we've been naive. We were hoping that we could spread capitalism and some Western culture and that they would see the light. And that's just never worked out well for us. We got to quit trying to delude ourselves into thinking we can make others be Americans. We're kind of a unique kind of special case here. And it really goes back to our founding documents and founding fathers and the premise that the country was set up on. But we can't go make that happen in other parts of the world.
Is there an effort to try and fix that to where they stop eating our lunch? Or
There has been a great awakening, and that is probably one of the best bipartisan things I'm seeing happen in Congress. We have a a truly bipartisan China task force now that's looking at all angles. Mike Gallagher is a colleague of mine, former Marine, who's one of the smartest people I know, who's chairing that group. And he has really gone out of his way to say this is not a political thing. This is about American sovereignty, and so we're looking at everything from the business, trade, military, pharmaceuticals, farming, agriculture. I mean everything, all dimensions. Because and a lot of this has really happened over the last 23 years or so since we got involved in the Middle East and put all of our focus there. We completely dropped the ball on pretty much everything else and focused on that. And China, meanwhile, has been continuing to grow and doing it in many cases using our own capital, using U.S. investment in their economy.
Right.
We're using our money, our pension funds, to invest in Chinese companies to turn around and dominate us.
So what's the general overall condition or shape of our military? Are we up for the challenge? You read where, a good majority of the kids can't pass a physical, and then you read about the quote unquote woke ideologies. I mean, you read about all sorts of stuff. Are we really okay? Or
so yeah, that's probably a whole podcast or more on that.
We'll have you back.
Yeah. We still have tremendous technology. We have great people serving in our military. But what we did, again, in 20 years of fighting in the Middle East is we allowed pretty much everything else to atrophy. The size and the quality of our Navy fleet is horrible now. It's not nearly up to the task. The Chinese are outbuilding us.
The Air Force will say the same thing.
And across the board, it's that way. A little bit different with China and the impact of trade and in the South China Sea. In some form or another, almost 70% of the world trade has some sort of touch with the South China Sea. That's a big deal. And I think we've been focused on the wrong things, personally. And you mentioned the wokeism and things like that. It is real. There are people who would like to gaslight us and say that that's not been happening inside the military, but we've got proof. We've seen.
Right.
We pulled together some curricula from the service academies. We'll get anecdotally. We'll have reservists will tell us, when there's such limited time to train, a weekend, a month, and yet they go in and spend an entire weekend doing sensitivity training and things like that. We need. My personal opinion is our war fighters need to be able to basically kick ass and take names. We have a military that I hope we don't use, but we don't use it because everybody else in the world will be afraid to take us on. I'm a strong believer of peace through strength, but you've got to be able to have a credible stick to wield. And it's a lot easier to get into wars than it is to get out of them. And the best way to stay out of them is to have a strong, credible force that people know we would be willing to use if we had to, but we don't use it freely. We don't use it to go try to make the rest of the world like America.
So one of my friends is Air Force General Jake Palumbo, flew F-16s his whole career and a bunch of other things. One question he always asks me is, Todd, what are you reading? And I'm not a good reader. I never have been. If I had been a better reader, I'd have been a better student. What is it that you're reading right now?
So it's interesting. My wife gives me a hard time about not reading enough fiction. I gravitate usually towards nonfiction stuff or biographies. I love reading about people's histories, but let's see. This recess, I've tried to force myself to not read political things so much, but
it's very liberating not to read political things.
It
gives your mind a rest.
Yeah, and we all need a rest. We all need to take a break from it. Actually, I was on a flight to Dallas a couple of weeks ago, and there was a lady sitting next to me, and we had not spoken the whole flight, but as we were landing, she goes, I don't normally do this kind of thing, but I just got to tell you, I'm reading this book that's like the greatest thing I've read in years, and I'd want to share it with you. And it's a book called Outlive by a guy named Dr. Peter Attia, I think is his name, but it's about, so this is not political, it's not biography or anything, it's about, it's a medical book basically, but how to live a longer life, but also improve the quality of the life that's in our years. And I've found it fascinating. I've since bought several copies I'm going to give to other people, but I just turned 59 last week. So it's, I'm kind of at this point in life where it's about longevity and making smart choices. And, you can get away with a lot of crazy things when you're young, but it all starts to catch up with you.
So who's better pilot, Navy or Air Force pilots?
Oh, Navy, hands down. And really,
I know it's all different.
Anybody can land at the airfield, but we just have the benefit of doing something that the Air Force guys just haven't practiced on. Now that said, we save a little bit of gas at the end of every flight to practice touch and go landings, because everything in the Navy is geared towards getting back aboard the ship.
Right.
And so I would say that the Air Force guys probably have a few more minutes in every sortie that they can get one more turn in, one more merge and one more dogfight to hone those skills. So they should be better dogfighters. But I'd say as far as better aviators, there's no question.
Well, the Central Florida Development Council had taken a trip to North Carolina a few years ago, and Jake and his wife were a few seats in front of me, and we came in for a pretty hard landing. I mean, it bounced.
Oh, you can always tell.
I'm a little nervous pilot. Yeah. I'm a nervous flyer. And Jake turned around and said, Navy pilot.
Of course.
And I just started cracking up. And John Strang, who I'd mentioned earlier, was a carrier pilot. He said, Todd, we can land in a parking lot if we need to. These Air Force guys, they have to have 8,000, 9,000 feet. He said, we can set it down wherever we need to.
Oh yeah, you land it, and you're targeting the 3-wire on the carrier.
That's right.
You're really you're looking at a spot about 30 or 40 feet long that you're trying to land, and your run out's only about 100 feet. So
I know you got to get going to another appointment. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you said, you think, I really wish you had asked me about that? Is there anything that I left out?
Oh, I always hate those questions. I don't know. I am. People ask me a lot of times, do you like the job? And I say, I really wrestle with that, and I don't like the job. I find it rewarding. It's difficult. I don't like.
It's not a normal environment.
It's not, and I don't like the animosity and the tension and there's a lot of angst around politics now that doesn't make it any better. But it's very rewarding, and it's something that as long as if I feel like I can be doing some good things for the constituents of Florida 18 and trying to help make that institution run a little better, then I'll do it. But it's not going to be forever, I can assure you that.
Well, you've got lots of support down here. We appreciate your service to our country throughout your entire adult life, and obviously your family for the last 200-300 years, going back to General Washington. And but I appreciate you coming in and taking some time today to talk about some issues, to give us some perspective that maybe we didn't have. I want to thank you, and I want to thank Alice for helping set everything up for us. And I know you're only as good as your staff and your team, and you've got a great one around you. Well, so
we have a great team, and one of the things that I have learned that I didn't know is how much our local staffs can help fix problems for people. You would hope that government agencies would work the way they're supposed to. They don't.
They don't.
And whether it's the VA, Social Security, passports, IRS, I mean, you name it, any government agency, if people are having problems with it, we've got folks that move mountains.
You have to have an advocate.
Results. Yeah,
and that's what they do for you.
And it shouldn't be that way, but when we call, and especially if I call, it's amazing how that works. We've had a lot of situations that people have just been banging their heads against the wall, in some cases for years, trying to get resolution, and we can get it really quick. So I would just really urge people to reach out to our office. And if it's not something we can handle, we can get them to the right folks. Sometimes it may be a state issue. It's not really our jurisdiction, but we will field all those calls and help get people.
At least telling them where to direct and where to go. And here, try this number. So
yeah.
Scott, thank you very much. We appreciate everything you've done. I appreciate you coming by and spending close to an hour with us. And we wish you good luck. We wish you safety, and hope you enjoy your recess. It should be coming to a close here pretty soon.
Yeah, recess isn't the right word, but yes, it's good to be out of D.C. and back in the free state of Florida for a bit. But thank you, Todd.
Thank you for everything. Appreciate it, Scott. Thank you. Hey, everybody. I want to thank you for listening to Todd's podcast. This has been your host, Todd Dantzler. If you enjoyed this episode, please tune in next time, where I interview Major General retired Larry Martin, where we will be discussing his rise up through the ranks to become a general officer in the United States Air Force and the leadership that it took for him to get to that position. I want you to give me a call, and please let me know what you think. As always, don't forget to rate, review, follow, and subscribe to Todd's podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions for me or any suggestions for future guests, please call or text our number at 863-288-8255. 863-288-0944 or visit todddantzler.com. Again, that's 863-288-0944 or visit my website, todddantzler.com. I look forward to hearing your questions and feedback, and please take care.